Welcome to Straight Talk for Business, where we dive deep into the ever-evolving world of strategy, managing changes and risks, learn how to stay ahead of the curve, and navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. From enhancing your leadership style to executing strategies, this is your go-to source for making it happen. No matter your industry or business size, whether you're a seasoned executive, an entrepreneur, or a business professional, we've got you covered. Let's break barriers, challenge conventions, and unlock the secrets together. Tune in and put yourself on the path to success.
Hello. Welcome to another session of Straight Talk for Business. And I'm absolutely delighted to have as my guest today, Gareth Morgan. He is an author and a speaker, and he's authored at least 2 books that I've read. The Winning Conversation, Unlocking Results from the Inside Out, and The Winning Motivation, Turning Pressure into Progress. This second book is the one that's going to be the topic of our conversation today. In fact, I just finished reading it for a second time. So Gareth is an elite performance and leadership coach. He's got over 20 years experience building cultures and breaking performance barriers across some diverse sectors, including faith, professional football, secondary education, financial services, and healthcare. And after having read his books, I think he's uniquely positioned to be able to help people deal with the real issues behind the issues, because he specializes in building beliefs and behaviors that have a real tangible impact on performance. Actually, Gareth, after our first conversation, I came to the conclusion, is one of the few people who believes in effectiveness over efficiency, especially now in this age where we're driven by high tech and now, of course, AI. Simply put, leaders who cultivate the right motivations and the right conversations will win in this new era. Gareth also has a presence on YouTube where he shares his insights. Gareth, welcome to Straight Talk.
Dragica, really good to be with you.
And you are coming to us today from the UK. So tell us a little bit about where you are. Because it's cold, cold and wet.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Oh, it's a beautiful day today. And we haven't had many of those this year so far. So we're taking advantage of it. And I'm in Greenwich in London in the UK.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. So what I'd like to do is cover this particular book. One of the things that fascinated me about this book, Gareth, was the introduction. I felt that the introduction was really, really powerful because it kind of really, you hit the ground running with the introduction. Tell me a little bit about, what led you to create the introduction that way, because it is so very impactful.
I think the introduction to the book is a summary in one sense of my journey. I grew up with this innate sense in me that I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to make a change. I wanted to make an impact. And so I guess it's been a running theme throughout my life. And when it came to writing this book, I really wanted to take the years of my experience of wrestling with the question, how do I maximize my impact to make the world a better place, to make business, industry, the sector I'm in, my community, society, how do I maximize that impact? So for me, I'm a sports lover. I love football. I get to work in professional football as well, which is kind of combining passion and work. And so in the introduction, I do speak about the whole idea of becoming an impact substitute, somebody who comes off the bench because they're watching the game and they can observe what is missing. And I guess I became acutely aware on my journey that there were things that were obvious to me that weren't obvious to others. And that was one clue of many to discovering my purpose. But then as I've become really passionate and involved with helping others discover their purpose too. And so the impact substitute is able to observe the pitch, but then has to have the belief that I can come on and change the game. So for me, I guess it's a combination of personal passion as well as an ongoing theme and question that I've wrestled with for many years.
So I really like that, the coming off the bench piece. And that really, really resonated with me because I'm a big fan of baseball. My son was called the pitcher with the golden arm. So
Oh,
when
wow.
he was much younger in his teenage years, he was a baseball player and a really good one. So I really got the coming off the bench. But I looked at this entire book, Gareth, from very much a business perspective. And I saw so many metaphors throughout, not just, I mean, they really hit me right off the bat in the introduction, but throughout the book. But talk a little bit more about somebody who's going to read this book, about that impact substitute. In how would you apply that in business?
Mm. I think it's especially relevant in business because let's face it, our business, our work, our professional life is where we spend the highest quality of hours that we get to live, certainly for a good, segment of our lives. And so with any person who wants to maximize their life, who wants to really, make a difference, make an impact, deliver value, then of course the kind of optic of business is a really important place to look at this subject. And I think what I've discovered is there are so many people who are either surviving that precious time at worst, hanging in there, maybe because they've always done this career, they've always even run this business. Maybe they've taken on a business from a family member, or they've just ended up in a position and because of choices they've made, financial commitments, they've ended up stuck, trapped, and yet don't feel that they are able to bring the very best of who they are to that environment. And I think there are many people who at the very worst are surviving, or people who are doing well, but know there is so much more that they could be doing. And yet through a perception that there isn't the opportunity, that the environment isn't compatible to who they are, or maybe the competency that they have, then, the life of a substitute can go two ways. A substitute can be part of a squad, but feel like they're almost just making up the numbers. And the mindset of just, I'm making up the numbers, I think, and I have no statistic for this, but I would dare to suggest that a good portion of employees today probably feel like that. I'm just a number, or I'm just making up the numbers. And what real difference would it make if I wasn't here? And I think that's probably the saddest existence that a human being can endure. Now, people who listen to this right now may be feeling this, but it doesn't have to be your existence going forward. There is a way, because as I talk about in all my books, ultimately life is determined not from the outside in other words, my environment, my sector, the business, the segment of industry that I'm in, that doesn't control my destiny. Ultimately, change comes from the inside out. It's about empowering you to understand you can start to make your way from that just existing on the bench to being the person who's about to step onto the pitch and feel like right now, I am going to deliver change as part of the bigger objective that we're trying to achieve, whether that's a business, whether that's an industry, or whether that's you setting off as an entrepreneur.
That's interesting. One of the things that I've sort of been observing, if you will, because that's really what the substitute does a lot of the time, right, is observe. But if you take it higher up in the organization, the leaders, the decision makers and so on, are they taking the time to sit back and observe and reflect? Because it seems to me if you're going to figure out, what's the missing piece, and you talk about, being of service, which is not intentionally, but in some minds detached from money making, right? Some people don't bring the two ideas together. What do you think the power of observation can be in business when somebody actually takes the time to sit back, observe, and reflect?
I think it is the competitive advantage. I think it is the skill that and I've not coined the phrase, but I certainly would suggest people thinking about leadership in this way. It is the role of a coaching leader. A coaching leader is somebody who observes, who is curious. And I guess they are curious with a fundamental belief that the missing pieces that we require to deliver the collective objective or to achieve an even greater outcome than we are already, if we're doing well, the missing pieces are in our people. And inside of a person, there is so much more than we currently realize. And I think just purely from a resource management perspective, people will say, people are our greatest resource. Well, does our behavior, do our systems actually almost convict us of believing that? For instance, what exploratory work are we doing to understand what is in our people? What are their hopes, aspirations, drivers? And what are we leveraging and what are we not leveraging? Because ultimately, if we can create an environment of discovery, understanding what is in the person that I employ, then actually we can start to discover the missing potential that we have yet to leverage, that missing resource. And so I think the only way you can do that is by creating that observation mindset that says, I need to, and that's by asking questions. That's what a coach does. They ask more questions than just giving information. And I think there's this perception sometimes within leadership that as a leader, I've got to give the instruction. I've got to give the answers. No, I would suggest the stronger leader always has a bias towards asking questions with the belief that the answers are in the people.
Okay. I love that. I love that. Now, the thing that really caught my attention in the introduction was the great paradox. And I've written on that page in the book more than any other page. And I think the reason it fascinated me so much is because it is the paradox, right? That life is all about change. And the thing that came to mind, and I kept coming back to this notion that, in consulting and in teaching and so on, the thing that you always want to know is what are leaders' pain points, right? And so they talk about pain points, and then they, well, we're okay with it actually. And the thing that I came to realize because it's touched on in several places in the book, is that the real pain points are not the actual problem in organizations, but that the problem is that they have to make the change. That's the pain point. And so the metaphors that you use around that, the purpose of life is to be able to navigate the change and so on. And, we're now in a time where I sense, whether you're in Europe, the UK, or North America, or any other part of the world, we are going through some phenomenal changes. And what's going to have to be managed? It's really not change management. What do you think people are actually going to have to look at to manage in order to get through the changes that are coming and surviving and thriving when they get through it all? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think and it kind of carries on from the previous point, really, which is how do we help the individuals who make up an organization? Because let's face it, an organization fundamentally is a collective of individuals, organisms, and so how do we help the individual on their personal journey of navigating change? And then how do we collectively pull together as a community to navigate that? Because I think the biggest challenge that we have in the current wave of change is that whilst, and you mentioned earlier, we are more connected than ever through high tech, the reality is, as society, we've become increasingly individualized. So you've got, again, it's a paradox in one sense. You've got the paradox of we are highly connected and yet more individualized. And I think, again, COVID and the aftermath of COVID has almost accelerated this. More people working from home, or certainly hybrid between the two. And so, and I'm not against that, but I think, again, it does create more distance. It creates less interaction and connectivity for less time. And so I think what the change that we've got to navigate is how, and this is as a leader, how do I help the individuals walk through their change? And I think we've got to leave behind this myth that people have their personal life and their professional life, and that somehow they can compartmentalize that and never the two shall affect one another. I mean, it's a crazy thing. And okay, I understand, boundaries around certain things but I think we've got to look at the whole person and say, actually, yes, I employ them for these hours, but why wouldn't I be interested in helping them journey and navigate their own personal change journey in order to, again, leverage that for their benefit and for the collective benefit. And I think that comes through two things. I think it comes through helping every person understand what is their personal mission. I think you can cope with change when you have a clarity on the trajectory of where you're heading. The winds will blow of change, but do I know where I'm setting my sail? Actually, when you're setting your sail, the winds become advantageous. Without the sail, they become something that could take me out. And so how do I help the individual and then the collective get clarity on mission? And then the second part is, how do I help empower them with a mindset to navigate the pain on the journey? And I think our appetite for pain and the suffering of the journey, which is not a word that people like to talk about, but in reality, what is business if it is not solving problems? And the bigger the problem you solve, the bigger the potential upside of that. Well, the bigger the problem you solve, the more pain that's going to be involved, the more suffering that there's going to be en route. And I think, again, we are in an age in which we ask the question, how do I get the upside without the suffering? How do I get the prize without the pain? And the reality is you can't. You end up with underdeveloped characters in positions that they cannot sustain. And so I think the question that a leader needs to ask themselves is, how am I helping individuals manage their mission and their mindset so that actually these winds of change are the wind in the sail that we have set a clear trajectory for?
Yeah, that's a beautiful explanation. And it really resonates with me because, as you know, I just finished writing a book. And
Yes.
One of the things that I was going through the process of when I was writing this book is interviewing lots and lots of leaders in companies. In fact, I went through more than 100 interviews. One of my goals with each interview was to ask the question, what do you want? And that really, kind of leads us into the first chapter of your book, and the 7 chapters were so illuminating for me as I was writing, as I was interviewing and talking with people. But the first one fascinated me because you asked the very question that I was asking leaders, and that is, what do you want? What do you want for your business? I wasn't going personal, although I realized the crossover there. And I have found it is one of the most difficult things to answer, because what I ended up getting more often than not is what they don't want, right? And it's what they've got today. So tell me, Gareth, what are your thoughts? Why? And I know this is in your book, but maybe just talk about that whole speculating chapter. Why is that so hard? Are people afraid of missing out on something? Like, why can't they just say, I want that, and I want that, and I want that? Why is it so hard? It fascinates me.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. From my experience, it sounds the most simplest of questions that somebody should answer, and yet the most puzzled faces that I get are when I ask that question, and actually I encourage them because they usually struggle to give an answer, and I think I think there's several reasons potentially why they struggle to give an answer. I think firstly, it's because the answers that immediately spring to mind don't actually resonate with what they truly want. And so I think, most people would say, well, more time, more money, more relationships, more, the obvious things. And yet when we say them, I think if we were going to truly answer the question, what is it I want? It's almost like those answers don't suffice. They don't actually represent what we really want. And there's nothing wrong with those things. And so I think that's one reason. I think another reason is because people don't feel worthy of the answer that they're going to give. So actually there's a sense in which, if I say this now, then maybe what's your perception of me going to be? And also, I actually have a low self-opinion of myself and don't think I'm worthy of that answer. So I think that's why sometimes people hold back. Fear of what others might think, embarrassment of even them hearing themselves say something remotely successful or something of significance. So I think fear can be at the root as well as a lack of clarity. But I do encourage people to start with what is it you don't want. And the reason why I encourage them to start from there is because if you want somebody to answer that question in the most authentic way, what you're really asking them is to connect with their passion. Mm-hmm. And passion is the willingness to suffer. People often think about passion in relation to, what is it you get excited about? Or what is it that's going to make you happy? But actually, passion is to be with suffering. If you look at the dictionary definition, it's something worthy of suffering for. And so I think it does always start with what is it you don't want? And that's connected to the problem you're alive to solve. And I think, I always I'll give a quick story to illustrate this. One of the things that I've done and do as part of my role in life is I lead a church. And when I was in the first few years of being a church leader, I remember being in a church service and I was bored. I was bored out of my mind. And yet I was responsible for the service I was leading. And I remember looking down the aisle and I could see Erin, who's my eldest daughter. She's 22 now, but she was only 1 at the time. And she was stood at the end of the auditorium. And she was just dancing around while everybody else looked and felt like they were at a funeral. And in that moment, I just made a contract with her almost. She wasn't aware of this, but I made a contract with her. I said, I don't want this for you. By the time you're 13, this is going to be an environment and a place that you'll be proud to tell your friends about and to bring them to. And so it was in that moment, it was an immense sense of enough is enough, no more of this. And then, and why? Because I don't want this for somebody that I love. This isn't right. This isn't a mismatch. And so what is it I want, and why do I want it? I want an atmosphere that is empowering, vibrant, something that she will go and invite her friends to, be proud of. So I think starting from a place of what is it you don't want, and I think the follow-up question is, why don't you want it? Because in the why is the emotion. In the why is where the fuel is to bring about the change. And then you can flip that question over. Okay, well, if that's not what you want and why you don't want it, what is it you do want and why do you want it? And usually when you've got that contrast, I think people then can start to clarify what is it they want.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. The thing that I took a course once years ago, and it was about that very thing, what do you want? And it was in the shape of a V. And the one side of the V was the what do you want? And you struggle and you struggle and you struggle. And then finally, when you get clarity around what you want, the other side of the V was the how. When you get clarity, the how is revealed. I'm sure that was in somebody's teachings in some book years ago, but in this course, it was really relevant. And the chapter on starting and the struggle, chapters 2 and 3, really spoke to me about that. And the thing that also spoke to me a lot was the way you articulate the 7 stages of change. As a matter of fact, I was reading something yesterday, just yesterday, and somebody was writing this, and they said, we have to change at the speed of technology. Well, you know what? The 2 million-year-old brain is not going to move overnight from what it's always done to just all of a sudden moving. And so I appreciate the 7 stages because they're real. Can you talk a little bit about those 7 stages and why you've broken them down that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the 7 stages are, and I highlight them especially as the emotions on the diagram. In fact, my daughter Beth and my second daughter, she drew the illustrations in the book. And so
they're very good.
Yeah, she's very clever. Very good. and a lot cheaper to pay than so the 7 stages I label with the 7 emotions that I saw that I went through every time I went through an iteration of vision and the journey that I was on. And so those emotions from dissatisfaction, indecision, inadequacy, feeling trapped, confused, overwhelmed, and uncertain and full of doubt. Those are very real emotions. And let's face it, as human beings, emotions can take us out of the game. Yeah. I work in professional sport, and your ability to harness your emotion and not be ruled by your emotion is critical. And of course, it's the same in business. You're making choices, but are my choices being driven and ruled by my emotion, or the emotion of those I lead, or the emotion that's created because of the current economic climate or our industry and the changes it's going through? It's, I think, self-awareness. Okay, this is how I'm feeling right now. And what I try to do with the 7 stages is to help people understand that those 7 emotions, they could be perceived just simply as negative emotions, but those emotions are actually not signals, that you're going down and that you're going to be taken out of the game, but they're actually signposts. They're signposts to help you understand in that moment you're feeling this because actually now this is what you are to do. And I connect each of those negative emotions with a clear positive action. And I think once you realize that, you start to almost appreciate those negative emotions when they come. I'll often go for a walk, and because I'm aware, and obviously I'm in it all the time, I'm thinking, which of those 7 emotions right now would I say I'm feeling the most? And I'll literally go through them. And if I'm thinking, right, actually, it's overwhelmed. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And immediately I know that's linked to a capacity issue. And again, you can go to that chapter in the book then, and I work through how you turn that from being a signal to a signpost. Okay, now what do I need to do next? And all of a sudden I realize that negative emotion is a bit like oil in the ground. On its own, it's just this gooey mess. But actually, when I drill for it and I harness it, it becomes a rich resource that can actually, bring about a better future. So, that's why I took those 7 stages, and there is a sequence to them as well, in terms of, the stage of a journey in taking a vision, that dissatisfaction, thing I want to change, problem I want to solve, all the way through to reality. There's a sequence to those emotions because they are layers that you build upon, because the shift really is to understand, yes, there's a future that I'm working towards, but also there's a person I'm becoming in order to deliver that change. And there are 2 things at play: the vision, the outcome that I want to see, but also the character development, which is painful. There's no 2 ways about it. It's painful. It involves negative emotions, but it's good news when you realize those emotions can be translated into helpful steps. And I hope that's what I've done through the book.
Oh, you have. You definitely have. The thing that followed right on to that, which is really so appropriate, was the values. We talk about values. Companies have values. People have values. Companies expect to hire people with the same values. Well, that's just not going to be possible. The values I have are not going to be the same as my client organizations. They're going to be, but hopefully 2 or 3 will align. The thing that I really, really liked, and I actually made an illustration of it for myself, was the feather. The feather. You're a master at metaphor. I must tell you, Gareth, you're absolutely a master at metaphor, because there are so many throughout the book that so resonate. But that feather was top notch. And the way that you explain it, and I'm not going to do it justice, but why you did the feather that way, the front end being the seed and the vision, and then the arrow, pardon me, the arrow, the front being the seed and the vision, and then the rest of the arrow having the feathers on it being the rest of your values, up to 6, 8, 10. I guess it's going to vary by individuals. The powerful metaphor here with the values that really follows on everything you just talked about is really that this is your identity. This is your algorithm. That's the metaphor that really rings true. And I think at all generations, when they look at that, it's going to resonate. So talk a little bit more about how the arrow I think is really important, but then it's also your algorithm, it's your identity. Because I don't know that everybody sees their values as their modus operandi, as their algo, as their identity. Talk a little bit more about how that came about, because that was a good one for me.
There are both strategic values and supporting values. I talk about 2 values particularly, and that you have that are your strategic contribution into an environment, sector, industry. And if you think of what those 2 values could be, so for me, I'll tell you what mine are. Mine are clarity and innovation. So, and the reason that's really helpful is because, let's face it, sometimes in life and in business, we struggle to think, what's next? What do I do next? What's the next step? So when you think of an arrow, of course, there are kind of two elements to it, really, which is the arrowhead, which its job is to land on the target, to cut through that target so that it remains in position, and also to cut through the air en route to the target. And so that for me speaks of strategy. That's your route. But of course, the fletchings of the arrow, the kind of the feathery part, for want of a better term, is what supports the flight. It creates balance and enables the arrowhead to land in the place it should land in. And so I think we have values that are supportive. Again, another metaphor would be, they're almost, the supportive values are like the soil, but the strategic values are like the seed. In other words, that's what's going to create the visible effect and change. And I encourage people to think about their values in those two ways. I think we all have certain values that are supportive. These are, the things that matter most to me, that are really important. And if those values are jarring with those that are around me, the environment becomes uncomfortable. It becomes incompatible for me to work in. But your strategic values are different. Your strategic values are the values that you can call upon in a moment when maybe you're struggling to know what to do next. When you're asking yourself the question, what does the next move look like? They're like the lenses that you can put on your eyes that suddenly, and I know you wear glasses, I've got contact lenses in, so we both understand, if you've not got your lenses on, you can maybe make out the things that are around you, but you don't have that clarity. But the strategic values almost give you a set of lenses. And for me, my two strategic values are clarity and innovation. And I can put those lenses on in any environment, even an environment that I'm not used to working in, and realize, that's who I am. I am clarity. So how can I bring that into this environment? I am innovation. So I can bring that, even if I don't know what's, in this context, I can be of value, and they become my strategic edge, the point of impact that I can deliver. So I like to encourage people to think of values in those two ways.
That explanation I didn't get out of the book. I got a lot out of the book, but that, what you just said, because my two values now make total sense in terms of it's my go-to, right? Because mine are clarity and service. And I'm really clear that I want to help people. And right. And there's no color around it. It's just crisp. And it's really sharp. And the way that you just, strategic, it's what you go to. That's really powerful. Okay, so let's move on through the book. So the next couple of chapters, I was able to kind of wrap in my mind as something that goes together. And that's surrendering and sifting. Once you've got, the whole picture, what you want, your clarity, what's driving you, basically what your lens looks like. And now it's just really surrendering to that and then sifting. I got a lot out of that for me, but speak a little bit more about how somebody would use those two concepts for themselves to give themselves direction once they've established what their values are.
Yeah, great question. I think surrender, and there is a reason why it's at the bottom of the valley picture that is drawn in the book. And so for those that are listening, in the book I use the picture of a person looking almost across a chasm to the other side of a mountain, but there's this huge valley in between, and the 7 stages are to navigate your way down into the valley and then up out the other side. But the surrender stage 4, is quite literally at the bottom of the valley. And the reason that is there is because in the first half of the journey, it is very much about that clarity of identity, clarity of impact. But then I think you have to come to the point on the journey of character development, because again, this is the bit that most people miss. They understand vision and yeah, it's where I want to get to and strategy, but they fail to understand that what's actually happening is a metamorphosis. It's the caterpillar to the butterfly. And that's another analogy that is a useful metaphor, because at the point at which the caterpillar is no longer a caterpillar, nor is it a butterfly, it is gloop in a chrysalis. It has had to surrender its old identity en route to emerging into the new identity. Now, that sounds, exciting until you're in it. Because it's amazing en route on the change journey, how we fail to realize how attached we've become to things in the past. And that could be position, title. Somebody listening to this could be the challenge for you might be stepping out of a comfortable role and position and a successful role and position in a company to go out on your own. And you're going to have this moment where, in theory, it looks a great idea and exciting, and it is. But there are going to be moments where you have to surrender that old identity. And it's like you're in a valley. It can feel lonely. It can feel isolating. You can actually feel trapped whilst taking a route that you thought was all about freedom. That's a paradox. That's a paradox. Many people don't realize. They think, I just want to get out of this job. And getting out is one thing. But getting out and into, there's a gap in between. And the great thing is, this is not kind of to put anybody off. It's just to create awareness that if you're feeling trapped right now, that's okay. You're in good company. You're just at stage 4. But there is a surrendering. There's a letting go of identity in order to embrace the new identity. But then the sifting stage is the next stage, which is then, okay, whilst there's a change that's happening in my core identity on this route, actually what then is going to happen, and this is to almost encourage you not to be taken out by some surprises. You have changed. You have changed on this journey. Now, when your character changes, it's like the substance of who you are has changed. And I don't know if you've ever, had a magnet where you've, connected it to metal, and then obviously, it's compatible, it connects. But if you change the substance of that magnet and it doesn't connect anymore, there's no connection or magnetism because the substance has been altered. And again, using the metaphor of the butterfly, how many butterflies have you seen hanging around with caterpillars? And yet, are they not from the same journey? Well, that's because on this route, relationships are going to change. Groups that you are in and ones that you felt comfortable in may not. I'm not saying all, but some may not be compatible anymore. And this becomes even more kind of confusing, which is that negative emotion that you feel at the sifting stage, even when it's within your own family. And now, again, this isn't about, well, then get rid of all those relationships and, just go find a whole load of new ones. No, it's just simply about understanding, okay, this is what's happening and this is okay. It's just part of the journey. And sifting is that, just like if you want to move into a new house. And when we moved to London back in 2014, you get a lot less house for your money. And so we had to sift through and get rid of what wouldn't fit in the new life that we were building. And it's like that internally. We've got to sift through, what is it I now believe about relationships, finances? What is it I now believe about what really matters? There's a whole list of things that we need to sift through, but realize that we have to go through that process because you can't take everything with you or everyone with you.
So how often do you suppose, given what you just said, and especially lifelong friends, family, even distant family, and so on, how often, like a crab trying to get out of a bucket, how often do you think people get pulled even after they've gone through that, let's call it a transformation? People can get pulled back in. What can stop them from getting pulled back to the old caterpillar form? I mean, you can never, once you're a butterfly, you're a butterfly. But is it? I mean, is it that straightforward?
It's a great question. And I think at this stage, this is now where we have to understand it's not a journey I can do alone. We all need a community, and that could be a team at work. It could be connections, friendships, just people around me where there's that accountability. So that are going to prevent me making my way back up the mountain, back to where I was. It's so easy to go back to default. And so we need people to whom we are accountable that actually say, okay, these are my values. This is the impact I want to deliver. These are some of the things now that I'm having to process. And we need people who have either been on that journey, who are going through that journey, or ideally both. And we need that because, again, we will tend to rationalize our defaults. Oh, I need to do that because, and we go back to the way we were, whether it's that's a habit or whether that's a relationship or whatever. It's amazing how, we will rationalize that. And we do need people who are going to say, but you said this, you made a promise to, and again, not from a judgmental, condemnatory kind of standpoint, but we need that accountability. And I think, again, in business, this is where on this journey, if a business is going through this transition, and this transition in this book can absolutely be applied to an organization that is going through transformation, whether that's acquisition, whether that's having to pivot and change, there is going to be a sifting process and being really clear on what we are collectively being accountable to, what we are, and I always talk about in this process, there are things that have to stop. And we have to name them, list them. They could be attitudes, they could be behaviors, they could be systems, they could be strategies, things that have to stop. Steve Jobs, very famous for stopping, however many things it was, 30 plus things, and then just sticking with the 4 things. Again, what did he do? He sifted because there was a new era that was trying to emerge. And you have to create space for the future that's trying to emerge to take place. So there are things that we have to stop. There are things that we have to identify. No, these things can move forward as they are. There are some things that, they do have a part to play in the future, but they must change. They have to change. They can't carry on as they were. And then there are things that have to start, new things. And I think that's a quadrant that I use, that any individual can use. What do I need to stop doing? What do I need to start doing? What needs to carry forward as it is? And what needs to change in order to move forward? And I think that's an iterative process that I encourage people. Yes, you can do it alone and it can be of value, but do it in a team. Do it in a community, because accountability is going to prevent you getting pulled back into that bucket, to use your crab metaphor.
And so that's going to be a stretch, which kind of takes us into the next chapter. And the stretch is really that growth piece, right? And the community. So I just want to share, I had an experience when I got to, excuse me, that particular chapter, and having to really make the stretch was the whole concept of volunteering. And I've always been a bit of a volunteer, but once I moved out of the big city, if you will, into a smaller community west of Toronto, I thought I'm going to do things differently now that I'm not in the big city, right? And it's post-COVID and all of that good stuff. I really found it hard because I had a whole new community around me, different people, not the people I had before, because they were 2 hours away. And the stretch piece is not comfortable. But the old saying, once you stretch an elastic to its maximum, it never returns to its original shape. And it's it's really, really true in talking about pain points. Pain points aren't the problem. It's having to make the change. That's the problem. So, how does one learn to stretch? If they're not accustomed to it. I suppose I could say I've gone through transformations a few times, and each time it's painful as hell. But it's what you have to do. But how does somebody motivate themselves, right? This is about winning motivations. So how does somebody motivate themselves, regardless of the community they're in, to make that stretch, to do that thing differently, to stop what they have to do?
Yeah, a really good question. I think, this stage is very much about creating capacity. I think a lot of people don't stretch themselves because their immediate excuse is don't have the time, don't have the energy, don't have the money, I talk about in the book, 9 out of 10 can'ts are usually really won'ts, and it's usually rooted in some form of fear. And as you've described, we human beings are creatures of habit. We like our set patterns, and we don't like it when those patterns or we're forced to break those patterns. And again, I think that's why, apart from the obvious negative side of COVID, one of the upsides was we were all forced to change our patterns. And that circuit breaker of our patterns forced a reevaluation of, what's this all about, and what do I want for the future? And so I think, how do we make that stretch? Again, this is where the future vision has to be so clear enough and so compelling enough that, well, if I don't stretch, if I don't start to make those changes, and this is very much as well about setting clear boundaries in order to create capacity, then that vision is really a fantasy still. Even though I've gone through all of this work of internal work of values and what is it I don't want and why, and going through the whole thing of surrender and sifting, actually we can miss out on these final two stages by not, first of all, stretching and saying, okay, I've got to create some boundaries, because in life, let's face it, all of the significant things in life that are of highest value we never plan for. Think about some of the friendships that we've accumulated, some of the opportunities we've ended up with. Most of them we never planned for. And yet, actually, it is in the margins that we don't get to manipulate that actually the miracles take place. But some of us are living life so fixed within patterns that we feel we have to control, and control is a big thing that will force anybody out of this whole process. If you have to be in control and that need to be in control, you will actually live a very small life. And I'm a control freak, so I'm as guilty as anybody else. But actually, it's in the letting go and creating margin in my life that's where the greatest opportunities are waiting. And so I love the fact that you challenged yourself, new friendship groups, volunteer for something that you never would have seen yourself do. This is about creating the opportunity for something to happen that is trying to emerge. And again, this is where people say, well, when I go into an environment like that, people are going to look at me funny, or you're going to wonder who I am. Again, this is why, no, remind yourself of your values. I am clarity. I am, and then remind yourself, and this is what I bring. This environment doesn't change who I am, but I can serve this environment. And when you do that in the margins that you never predicted you would be, and that you can't manipulate or control, watch what happens. That's where the future starts to emerge.
Oh, beautiful. So far we've talked about the 6 steps, and I think I'm richer knowing them now than I did when we started I know more now than I did earlier. This is fabulous. Um, we're going to go to steadying, which is the next logical phase. But the question that's really burning to be asked here, of the first 6 steps that we talked about, Gareth, is there one that takes longer to get through than any other? Typically, I mean, you coach a lot of people, and I'm going to presume you're using all of this in your coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, but is there one step that takes much longer than the others?
Yeah, and I would actually, funny enough, I would actually say it is from experience, both personally and so far on the journey of applying this, it's actually between between the seventh step and reaching the goal. It is I've reached, and that's why doubt and uncertainty is the emotion, because all the groundwork's done. Where is the ta-da moment? Where is
It never comes.
and in that moment, that's the test. That's the test of, number one, do I really believe in this process? Do I believe in the groundwork that's been done? Because certainly a lot of the stages up to stage 4 into 5 are like the groundwork underneath the surface. And let's face it, we all love to see the building rise out of the ground. We love to see the visible part. But when something's invisible, how do I measure progress? Especially if you're an achievement-driven person. And I'm guessing there'll be a lot of people that will listen to this that are, driven by achievement and aspirational. And I'm like that. I want to see what are those signs of progress. Yeah. And so in this final stage, and that's why it's steadying. Because this is the part where, and there's a story, isn't there? And I can't remember if I include this in the book, but it's a story of a lady. I can't remember her name now, but she attempted to swim. I think it was the Channel between France and the UK, and it'd never been done. And she set out on the journey, and a mile from shore, mist descended. And she didn't realize that she was only a mile from reaching her destination. But because she was in the fog and in the mist, she could not measure how far I've come or how far I've got left to go. She gave up. And when she gave up and she was pulled into the boat and she realized I was only a mile away, that for me that's the test. That's the test when everything's aligned, and yet now what I've got to do is I've got to steady. I've got to, and this again within a business sense, is understand what is the metric that I'm applying here of growth. I've got to understand that maybe I've been driven by lag measures. In other words, we're driven by the bottom line. We're driven by, this is the result that we want. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is not binary. It's not mutually exclusive. But actually what we've got to embrace are what are the habits? What are the strategies? What are the things that we know if we keep on doing these things consistently over time, then actually what we produce is the result. But we also end up producing a character that can sustain that result and then start to build people who can help scale that to the next level. Because you will have known from your own experience that, growth can be a blessing and it can be a curse. It's a curse when growth takes place and there isn't the foundation to sustain it. And so what I think happens in this final stage, and this is why it takes so long, is this is now about preparing you to sustain growth. And so you've got to stick with it. You've got to trust the process. You have got to, measure. It's not about just sitting there and hoping, but understand what is it I am measuring and why am I measuring it? And so I think for me, personally, this has been the longest stage, and that's why you will feel uncertain and doubt will creep in. But the strength of your conviction is what is being tested.
It's that old saying, I'm sure you've heard it, 3 feet from the gold. Uh,
Mm.
if you give up now, you may just be 3 feet from the gold, like the mile from shore. And desperation to get to the result and not seeing it materialize in tangible ways is, I think, what a lot of people give up on, unfortunately. But
100%. And I think just to add there, I think in that moment, a lot of people talk about winning, but can't actually articulate what winning is.
mm,
And I think you have to decide, and this part of the process forces you to decide. Winning is not a destination; it is a process that I embrace. And I think when you make that shift in your mind, you will end up hitting milestones that are clear wins, but actually you understand it's the process now that is the win for me. And for me, success is, bringing my best each day to what truly matters most. And when I can define success like that, and I realize this is a process. So actually, I'll enjoy the milestones when they come. I'll enjoy hitting those goals and go for them. Go for them, make them big, make them challenging, make them stretching, but realize fundamentally it is about the journey. It is about the process. And so the final stage teaches you that.
and in the context of alignment, it's something with change management and all of that is alignment is something I deal with and talk a lot about. And there's so many different interpretations of that word. But being, for the entrepreneurs that are listening, being in alignment with your purpose, with your direction, and creating a business, it's got to be worth its weight in gold. I would think. And when you take it beyond entrepreneurs, when we talked about strategic, having intent and so on, but then there's that internal aspect, which is the operational. How do you operate as a person? Having the inner and the outer aligned is I think how your message, certainly for me anyway, resonated in a really big way.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased about that. And I think, that's why one of the overriding questions I use in the book, and again, I think this is a question that helps to keep us aligned in this process, is that question, in what way 500 years from now will the world be thankful that I was alive? And that question alone removes ego, because in 500 years, I'm not going to be around. This is going to be about legacy. It's going to be about bringing progress, adding value, leaving something better than I found it. And I think, that question alone kind of helps to keep it, everything aligned. It is about the value that I bring and the value that I'm going to deposit in this world once I've left it.
Yeah. And, this book, I would like to use the cover of this book as well, if I may, with your daughter's permission and yours, the little valley illustration. Take a snapshot of that, if I may, and put that with the podcast. And
Yeah.
I am so glad I found Gareth Morgan and what you've published. I'm about 2/3 of the way through Winning Conversations, and I can't wait to finish that. Now, Gareth, is there another book in the works?
Yes, there is actually, and it very much is about now. How do you take those two books, which, for me, the winning motivation is very much like the seed in one sense, and the winning conversation is like the soil.
Yeah.
And now it's about, okay, how do you take those two and really unlock significant change in that sector or industry? I think now is the time, more than ever. People realize my hope can't be in a government. My hope can't be in a business. My hope can't be in a business. My hope can't be in a company. My hope can't be in a My hope can't be in an economy. My hope can't, in one sense, the answer isn't coming from anywhere else. I've got to realize there's more inside of me. And I think now is the time for people to understand that change has to come through me. And I think there's a fresh wave, a fresh movement of change leaders that are about to arise across the nations. And it's from a grassroots. They don't need title. They don't need position in order to deliver change. And so I guess in one sense, this next book is going to be that manifesto that calls on that movement of change leaders, whatever season of life you're in, whatever segment of society you're in, whatever your demographic, we need people who are committed to being the change and delivering the change, and also being part of a greater movement that says, hey, do you know what? I'm not alone. There are others like me. And so in one sense, that book is going to be a rallying call, a manifesto for that movement to start to arise. I think it's happening. I'm only one part of what I sense is happening, but I'm going to contribute my bit, and hopefully this next book will do just that.
And I will look forward to it. I hope you let me know when it's ready to be read, because I'm right there. I'm going to be your first subscriber.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. And I look forward to reading your book as well when it's released.
It's in
Dragica.
editing.
Yeah.
It's in editing right now.
Amazing. How exciting.
I'm hoping it's going to be reduced a little bit, because I think I got too wordy in some places, but that's the thing. When you're trying to tame the turmoil, as it were, there's a lot to be said.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you've done an amazing job.
Gareth, I thank you so very much. I hope we'll have a chance to connect again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for making the connection initially. And yeah, whatever I can do to continue to support and cheer you on, I'd love to.
Perfect. Thank you so much.